Pitchers and catchers are reporting. Baseball is basically here as we kick off Orioles Spring Training. So I'm going to give you the 6 biggest storylines to watch in Sarasota. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about what are the biggest storylines we should be watching as Orioles spring training and workouts kind of get underway later this week in Sarasota. We'll discuss the new look Orioles with Craig Albernaz at the helm. We'll talk about can they stay healthier after the injury-riddled 2025, and then some more specific things, some players bouncing back, some defensive changes, what the bullpen looks like. It's the 6 big storylines that you should be watching out for. And that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day and helping make Locked On now the #1 sports podcast network. So we are kind of in it right now. I mean, pitchers and catchers are reporting later this week for the Orioles. I believe actually yesterday was its report day if you're playing in the WBC. For the O's, tomorrow is pitchers and catchers day for everybody, February 11th. First full squad workout is next Monday, February 16th. That's when you know every single player is going to be there and be on the field. We'll see when we hear from Mike Elias, though. I think Rock Kabako had something about it somewhere that this year, Major League Baseball is like forcing each GM and manager of each team to do like a virtual press conference before spring training. And I think all of them are happening later today. I don't know if that's been confirmed anywhere. Admittedly, I'm recording this on Sunday, so maybe between now and then it was confirmed elsewhere. But I think Mike Elias is going to do a pre-version of the Doomsday, first full squad workout or first day of spring training press conference where he reveals the injuries that have happened over the offseason that we don't know about that are now going to impact the Orioles roster. I think that's going to happen later today, so we'll probably break that down on tomorrow's episode. But either way, spring training stuff is happening. Players are in Sarasota. They've been in Sarasota for a little while. Baseball stuff is happening, and that is very, very exciting. And on today's episode, I've got 6 storylines for you because sometimes spring training, it's really exciting at the beginning. Pitchers and catchers report, full squad workout. That first spring training game is next Friday. That's always exciting, especially now that the Orioles are broadcasting 20 spring training games on MASN, their most ever. But then you kind of get into March and you're still like 3 weeks away from opening day. And it just kind of gets a little stale right in the middle of spring training. So I want to make sure we all have something to watch for, not as much right at the beginning or even right at the end. And it's nice this year because right smack in the middle, we get 2 weeks of the WBC, which will be awesome. And it will help with this feeling of spring training getting stale. But there's always going to be something to watch. So I've got 6 storylines you should be watching at Orioles spring training this year. And let's just kick it off with my #1 storyline. What does the new Orioles leadership look like on the field? It is the first spring training with Craig Albernaz at the helm, hired as the Orioles' new manager after, of course, Brandon Hyde was fired last May. Tony Mansolino took over as interim manager, but was not brought back. Albernaz, this is his first big league managing job. He was kind of the bench coach in Cleveland under Stephen Vogt for the last 2 years, so had plenty to do with their spring trainings, but has never been the head man. And for every spring training since 2019, we've seen Brandon Hyde at the helm. This is the first manager not named Brandon Hyde to work under Mike Elias as Orioles GM and president of baseball operations. So how will that look different? Will they look very different than they looked with Brandon Hyde at the helm? I mean, I've heard John Mioli and others talk about this, how different 2019 spring training, Hyde's first, looked from even 2018 spring training, which is Buck Showalter's final one. Just a completely different vibe down in Sarasota, a lot more relaxed, a lot looser. We'll see how different things look for this team in spring training. And again, there's a lot of new coaches in there. The pitching apparatus is kind of the same with Drew French at the helm, but basically every other coach has been changed out from what the Orioles had in 2025. How will that look different? It'll be good to hear from some of them during spring training. And then you kind of extend that leadership to the new veterans. Like, what role does Pete Alonso fit into in this Orioles clubhouse in his first spring training with Baltimore? What role do relievers like Ryan Helsley and Andrew Kittredge take on for this team? Do they make another veteran pitching addition? And does that guy come in and take on some sort of leadership role? Or do the Adley Rutschmans, Gunnar Hendersons, Jordan Westbergs, do they finally step up as guys who've been now in the big leagues for a few years? Do they step up as leaders? Some of those guys, especially Westberg, were pretty vocal this offseason about wanting more veteran leadership for the team. They did that with Pete Alonso, but those guys need to step up too, and they could be the guys long-term to provide that quote-unquote leadership in this clubhouse. I think that's going to be something to watch because it's a different spring training when you have a new manager at the helm for the first time. Number 2 storyline to watch: how healthy does this Orioles team look? First and foremost, if that, again, it feels like that kind of video presser is happening sometime later today here on Tuesday with Mike Elias and Craig Albernaz speaking to the media. We'll see if it includes the full version of the here's who's injured. We're going to get injury updates. Guys are going to be injured. It happens every single year. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's bigger, but there's always going to be something that you're getting unfortunate updates on. And I think we're going to get some updates here. That is what I will say is I believe there will be some, not that anybody's going to be season ending or anything, but just some disappointing injury updates about this team are going to come on Tuesday. So that's going to be a storyline to watch. Whichever players are entering camp with an injury or get one early in camp, can they rehab and be ready for opening day or not miss too much time if they do start the year on the injured list? That'll be first and foremost. And then it combines with more large picture stuff. This Orioles team, it wasn't the only issue, but it was a big issue, was just ravaged by injuries in 2025. They had guys who missed a lot of the year. They had guys who tried to play through injuries when they were on the field, and they were worse for it, the team and the players themselves. On the pitching side, I'll certainly be watching Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells coming off their first normal offseason in a while after elbow surgery. Want to see how Zach Eflin is progressing after the back injury. You had guys, Brandon Young, Albert Suarez, Chase McDermott. They all ended last year on the injured list. Now the word is they're all healthy, but you just want to see it and make sure. The big one on the hitting side, really, at least at this point, is does Adley Rutschman finally look healthy with the back issues, the hand issues, the multiple oblique injuries last year? Those have all just kind of almost ruined him for the last season and a half since he was a legitimate all-star catcher in the American League. We need Adley. The Orioles need Adley to get back to that all-star level of Adley Rutschman that we know is still in there for him. That's going to depend a lot on how successful this team is in 2026. You want to see him have a healthy spring training. Gunnar Henderson's shoulder that he revealed from last season, Colton Cowser's rib injury he revealed from last season, Tyler O'Neill's everything. Like this is stuff you're looking for. And then also, does Heston Kjerstad look healthier? Like, that's a big thing. Craig Albernaz and Mike Elias have said this offseason they expect a healthy Heston Kjerstad to be entering spring training on the field. That is a huge plus, not just for the Orioles, but for Heston and his overall personal health, even outside of baseball, is a great sign. But the next step beyond that he's healthy is, can he build himself back up to be a useful, somewhat important player for the 2026 Orioles? That is a gigantic question. It's not like the Orioles are counting on Kjerstad at all, but would be a really nice addition to have if he finds himself healthy again. Those are things to look at. And again, it happens every year. It's happened to Gunnar the last couple of years. It just happened to Westberg. It might happen again. Guys are going to pick up bumps and bruises and little injuries throughout spring training. So it's always also something to monitor. Pitchers are going to get hurt. This is usually I believe just statistically and data wise, this is when the biggest clump of pitcher injuries happen, is really in like early March, late February. It's when guys are fully ramping up their throwing programs again. And for some guys, it's just you ramp up and your arm just breaks, not actually breaks, but the ligaments start to tear and whatever then because you didn't throw for a little while. For other guys, it's guys who may have been feeling something at the end of last season. They were like, all right, well, we'll shut it down for 2 months. That'll hopefully heal it. Then they start to throw again in the spring. It's like, oh, that shutdown didn't heal it. Now I'm really injured and I'm going on the IL. You see a lot of those. That's bound to happen with pitchers. It's monitoring all of those things. It's really a big storyline at every team spring training every year. But specifically for this Orioles team that had just so many injury issues in 2025 and is counting on so many bounce backs from a lot of those players, that's going to be maybe the thing I'm watching the closest in 2026 spring training, is how those injuries come and go throughout their time in Sarasota. Plenty more storylines to get to, though. Coming up next, let's talk about kind of more of the bottom parts of the roster, but still important parts of guys fighting out in position battles. That's coming up after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person, or you can connect online, upload your documents, go about your day, get updates right in the TurboTax app. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, storyline number 3 to watch for the Orioles in spring training here in 2026 is who will emerge from this bullpen group, right? At this point for the Orioles, we feel like there are kind of sort of 3 locks to be in this bullpen. Ryan Helsley is one. He was signed to be the closer. Andrew Kittredge is 2. The Orioles traded for him, brought him back to be a high leverage guy. And I would argue number 3 is Tyler Wells, because he's going to be on this roster in some capacity. Even at this point, and I still think the Orioles are going to add another starter, but even at this point, Wells is not in the top 5 starting pitchers. He's going to be pushed to the bullpen, you would think, and he's going to be in a serious relief role. So I'd put him in there as well. Beyond that, everyone else has questions, and there's 5 open spots in a bullpen. There's going to be some real races happening that are going to be really intriguing to watch. Are Keegan Akin and Yennier Cano looking closer to their old form? Are they over the struggles that they both had in 2025, or are some of those struggles lingering into this spring training? You know, Cano does have options. Akin does not. Akin's a year away from free agency. Cano's a little further. They're definitely, you know, one's a righty, one's a lefty. They're different conversations to be had, but they're paired into the same group because they're veteran relievers who have been around for a few years and both struggled at the same time and now aren't locks in this bullpen anymore. Are Dietrich Enns and Rico Garcia for real? These are 2 guys who are out of options, who were really awesome when they came to the Orioles late last year and got some big-time chances in the final 2 months of the season after the Orioles traded away 4 relievers and then had Felix Bautista go down for the rest of the season. They had many openings in that bullpen, and Garcia and Enns were 2 of the guys who really stepped up and took control of those openings and started getting a ton of high-leverage chances under Tony Mansolino. The question is, you know, it's still Mike Elias, but will Craig Albernaz trust those guys to the same degree and use them in the same ways? Will they be able to make the team? More than likely, yes, because they're out of options. The O's want to be able to hold on to those guys and at least give them another chance. And both of them give you some flexibilities because both Garcia and Enns can go multiple innings at a time out of the bullpen, which is helpful when you have an inexperienced group. They're both veteran guys who have bounced around a ton. But neither of them had really showed anything until last year with the Orioles, and they're both into their 30s, so that there are questions about those guys. And then it's really the question of guys with options versus guys without options. Now, Cade Stroud was in this group of guys with options. He was then dealt to the D-backs in the Blaze Alexander deal last week, so he is no longer part of this bullpen group. I also still think the Orioles are probably going to add one more reliever that's going to be in the opening day bullpen before they actually get to opening day. So that could take away one of these spots as well, whether that ad is via trade or via free agency. It still feels like, especially among lefties, they're 1 pitcher short. But especially if they don't, can the guys with options, the Grant Wolframs and Chase McDermott's and Yarmiel Geraldo's and Jose Espada's, these guys with really good stuff but haven't really proven it yet at the big league level, can they beat out any of those guys who are out of options? That the group of guys out of options that's on the bubble: Colin Selby, Keegan Akin, Dietrich Enns, Rico Garcia. These guys, do they have the ceilings of the others? Some do, some don't. But at the end of the day, if you get down to one final bullpen spot and you have 2 or 3 pitchers left and one of them is out of options and the others have options, the guy who's out of options is going to make the roster because the other guys can just be sent to AAA and you can keep all of them in the organization. So I've already talked about this, but especially after Cade Stroud was dealt, there's a scenario where the Orioles get down to the end and it's, maybe Colin Selby versus Yarmiel Geraldo for the final bullpen spot. That spot would go to Colin Selby because he's out of options. Geraldo has them. And that allows you to, at least at the beginning of the year, keep both in the organization as potential arms for you to use this season. That, I think, is going to be a storyline to watch. Now, somebody's going to get hurt. They're pitchers in spring training. There's going to be injuries. Somebody's going to break out like crazy that we're not even seeing and be an awesome arm. Somebody's going to look horrible with the stuff way down and kind of fall out of the mix here. But that's something that really you can watch every day, in all 20 games that MASN broadcasts of spring training. And you can really, once we get past the third inning of some of these games, especially early in spring, they're going to go to these bullpen guys. You're going to see them a ton. And we'll be talking about a lot on this podcast, like who is stepping up, because there really are so many, I would argue, open spots in an open competition. I think in spring training, fans think there's more of an open competition going in than there really is. I think for the Orioles, for the first time in years, for a good Orioles team, there is like legitimate multiple openings that could be decided by how guys look in actual spring training games. And that means there's even more to watch out for. Number 4 on the storylines to watch for Orioles spring training. What will the Orioles do at the bottom of their roster, right? We got some clarity on that and some more questions to go along with it with the Blaze Alexander trade that the Orioles made with the Diamondbacks last week. He's a guy who they gave up something for. They gave up Cade Stroud and 2 prospects. Alexander is out of minor league options. He plays a lot of positions. If he's healthy, I think after that trade, he is guaranteed to make the Orioles opening day roster. Now, whether that's as the utility infielder, which is what he's kind of been doing a bit in Arizona, or if it's as a starter because the Orioles made that trade because there's an injury to another infielder, which is something I posited on the trade episode last Thursday that you can go and listen to if you haven't already. And I am just kind of feeling more and more and thinking more and more, and we'll just wait for the Mike Elias conversation coming up here later on Tuesday. But the Blaze Alexander thing, he might have more of a role than we think, at least to begin the season. So the initial question would have been, is there space to have both Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo on the roster after the Orioles signed Pete Alonso to a 5-year deal early this offseason? We've talked about that ad nauseum at this point this offseason. Is either guy still going to get traded before opening day? Is a possibility. But now you have, different conversations to have with Blaze Alexander in the mix. Is Jeremiah Jackson going to get a utility spot? Or did Alexander take that away and Jackson is just going to go to AAA? How does it shake out if there is an infielder hurt, right? If they made the Blaze Alexander trade because an infielder is hurt and Blaze is going to take that spot in the infield, then does it reopen a spot for Jeremiah Jackson to be an infielder? Or is it more like a Luis Vasquez type who makes the roster instead because they'd rather have a better defensive infielder be that utility guy? Is Leody Taveras, a guy they signed very early in the offseason to be the backup center fielder, is he guaranteed a spot on this team? Now you have Colton Cowser and you did bring in Blaze Alexander, who has played some center field at the major league level, maybe gives you a different option there. I would still lean towards, yes, Taveras being on the opening day roster as kind of that 5th outfielder, but you still never know what they're thinking about with him. And I just think it's interesting. It's really interesting, especially if there is some sort of injury and Blaze is in a different role, at least to begin the year, than we thought. I think there's a lot of different combinations the Orioles could go with. But I think one of the other biggest things that the Orioles will need in 2026 and that we're going to see some of in spring training is there were some guys, and some of this was because of injury, but there were some guys who just underperformed in 2025 that the O's are going to be counting on this year. Did any of those guys make changes? Do they look like they've bounced back? Do they look like they're healthy? That's one of the final 2 storylines to finish off this show. All right, storyline number 5 to watch at Orioles Spring Training with some workouts beginning this week. Number 5 is, did the guys who struggled last year make any changes. That's kind of a big picture thing to watch, but it's important, right? Colton Cowser, we learned, played through broken ribs, had the broken thumb, had a concussion issue. It was just a completely lost year. After he was awesome in 2024, probably should have won Rookie of the Year. He was bad last year, plain and simple. First of all, got to make sure he's healthy. Second of all, has he found a new way to try and hit off-speed stuff? Or can he at least get back to 24 Cowser, who couldn't hit a changeup, but it wasn't just fastballs. He was also hitting breaking balls, and that allowed him to be, 20% better than league average with the bat, amazing defensively in left field, and be a 4-win player for the Orioles. Is he looking more like that? And it's going to be different, too, for Cowser, because it's also how does he look in center field? He got good chances down the stretch last year after the Orioles traded Cedric Mullins at the deadline to be basically the O's everyday center fielder when he was healthy. That seems to be, even with the addition of Tavares and Alexander, those are more backups in center. It seems at this point that Colton Cowser is the Orioles' starting center fielder to begin the 2026 season. It's a position he played in college through the minors, kind of moved over to left field when he first got to the majors, and now is shifting his way back over there. It looked fine. I would say totally fine with a strong arm defensively out there last year. But is he ready for a full season of games out in center field if that is the plan? And did he do work in the offseason to get better at that position? That's going to be something really to watch with him. If Adley Rutschman is healthy, what does he look like? Does anything look different at the plate? Because stuff with the injuries in the oblique and the back and the hand, the swing started looking out of whack at times. Does it look better? Does it look more Adley-like from his first couple of years? Does he just look healthier and look better? That's going to be something we're really watching. And we already mentioned these two guys, Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo, but did either of them make changes in the offseason that could help keep them on this roster? Because they've been big questions since the Pete Alonso signing. Did Ryan Mountcastle commit to getting himself back to the old pull the ball in the air, hit for power guy? Has Kobe Mayo, I heard a little bit that he's been working more and more at the Orioles' direction to get back to being a third baseman defensively, at least have that tool in his bag. He came up as a third baseman, looked really rough over there. The Orioles basically said in 2025, Kobe, you're going to be a first baseman this year. And they gave him those chances over Mountcastle down the stretch once they traded Ryan O'Hearn. But there's some reasons why the Orioles want to move him back over at least part-time to third base. And the arm was strong but inaccurate. The moves to the ball were very hit or miss. I think he could still get back to the point where you can at least play him some over there. It's not impossible. He's still a young athletic player. He can do it, but it was rough at times. So you wonder, can he improve enough at third base? And I think he's already working down there at the third base position. Can he improve enough over there to be playable at third? And not necessarily saying you're going to need him. I mean, you obviously have Jordan Westburg at that position, but Westburg is a guy who's had plenty of injury issues over the past couple of years. And when he's come out of the games, Ramon Arias has been there to fill in. And the Orioles now have Blaze Alexander, who's played a lot of third base, and he will probably be the main guy to fill in. But again, if there is, the Blaze move came because of an infield injury. If that's the case, it would really behoove the Orioles to be able to play Kobe Mayo some at third base. It would behoove him to stay on the roster and be important and have the Orioles have an option over there who can presumably hit the ball. We got to look at his offense too, but that's going to be something I'm really watching because I think he's going to get some reps. I think Kobe Mayo is going to get a lot of reps at third base at spring this year. I think Craig Albernaz is a good guy to help him with those things. I really want to see how that looks. And can some of these other guys who had their own struggles, Jackson Holiday, if we see him out there, can he take another step forward? Is Gunnar Henderson looking healthy after the shoulder stuff? There are guys who we want to see take a step forward. I mean, it's even on the pitching side, right? Like Cade Povich was so up and down. Is there a different level of Cade Povich? Like he's been doing a lot of work this offseason, I know, and there's some analysts that are really in on Povich. Is that for real? Is that a different kind of pitcher? Do the Aikens and Canoes, have they taken another step forward? Did Brandon Young do anything? Because there were some really high highs and some really low lows. Did he change some things? There's always guys with new pitches, new velocities, best shape of their life. Who are those guys? And is it sustainable throughout the spring? Is it Cole Irvin throwing 96 in his first outing and then the velo dropping back down throughout spring? Or is it a guy who's really added something to his repertoire? That's certainly something to watch as well. And then in the similar vein as Kobe Mayo, number 6, my final storyline to watch, and I think honestly is my most player-specific storyline. I've talked about a lot of specific players we'll be watching, but Number 6 is, what does Samuel Basallo look like defensively behind the plate? I think that is a huge question for this Orioles team, not just for 2026, but probably more importantly beyond 2026 for Samuel Basallo. The Orioles signed him to the big contract last season, about a week after he debuted. He is a catcher. That is his position. But there are many questions about, can he really stick at catcher long term? And Adley Rutschman has had his struggles. Hopefully he will bounce back. But if Adley, there's a lot of questions about Adley's future in Baltimore. Now, the stupid questions that people were like, oh, they're going to trade Adley after they extended Samuel Basallo. I came on this exact show and told you they're not trading Adley Rutschman. That was stupid. That was so not putting 2 and 2 together in your brain. You need to roster 2 catchers. And remember, even if they hadn't extended Basallo, he would still be on the roster along with Adley Rutschman. So how did it change literally anything for the Orioles' plans with Adley for 2026? It changed nothing. People think what they want to think, whatever. Obviously, they weren't going to trade Rutschman. That was one of the dumber things I saw. Anyway, they're both here. They're both going to be catching. They're both going to be DHing. I might play a little first base, although less likely now with Alonso there. But Adley Rutschman is due to be a free agent after 2027. He's got 2 more years with the Orioles before he hits free agency if they don't extend him or re-sign him. And how he looks and performs and how healthy he is over the next 2 years is going to decide what his future is in baseball with the Orioles beyond 2027. There's a chance where we get to 2028 and Samuel Basallo is expected to maybe be the Orioles' number 1 catcher. That's certainly a possibility. But for this year, he's going to catch. I think it's becoming less and less likely that the Orioles actually will carry 3 catchers on the roster. I think it's just going to be Basallo and Rutschman. And so now you're looking around and you're saying, especially with Adley's injury issues, they're not going to want him to catch 120, 130 plus games back there. There's going to be some legitimate time asked for Samuel Basallo to be behind the plate. There's some stuff he does well. He throws well. The receiving is getting better. It still needs work. The blocking needs work. The game calling is going to get better as he goes along. We're going to see him catch, I think, a lot of different pitchers in Sarasota and in spring training. And that's going to be something really intriguing to watch, how he's receiving, how he's working with guys out there, different guys coming into the game. That's going to be huge for the future of the Orioles with him behind the plate. Because if Basallo, even if he's never a Gold Glove level catcher, if he can stay behind the plate long term, that's huge for the Orioles, and that's huge for his value moving forward. So, especially when he works with the vets, when he works with the guys who are projected to be in the rotation, when he works with, the Ryan Helsleys of the world, I will be watching very, very closely, especially now with Craig Albernaz, who came up through the coaching ranks working with catchers and was a catcher. That is going to be such a good combination for Samuel Basallo to have, and we'll see how that work can hopefully make him better behind the dish. So there it is, my 6 top storylines to watch during Orioles Spring Training. I'm sure there's going to be many, many more things to watch. If you've got other storylines, things you're really going to keep your eye on, let me know here. Comment in the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe while you're here. If you're an audio listener, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen. If you can leave a 5-star review and a rating as well on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that certainly helps us out. You got questions about the show, you got feedback, you want to talk some ball, you can always email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. And if you're really liking the Locked On Orioles podcast, there are ways to get more. The Everydayer Club is built for you. You can get Locked On Orioles ad-free. You can get members-only Discord access where you're chatting with me and other Orioles fans. And sometimes maybe I'll reveal some little tips and info and stuff that I might talk about on the show or before the show even comes out. Just head to lockedonorioles.supercast.com or check out the link in the show notes to join the Everydayer Club. And then again, as I talked about on yesterday's episode, planning on doing like a Combined with Orioles on the Verge live show where you can come and hang out with some other listeners and listen to the show and we can watch some Orioles together. Nothing finalized yet, but the plan is for Sunday, March 29th, around 12:30, before the Orioles 1:30 game at Camden Yards against the Twins that day. It's going to be somewhere at an establishment in the vicinity of the ballpark downtown. We're going to do some sort of Locked On Orioles on the Verge combo live show. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for some further information as we solidify those details, but maybe circle that date on your calendar if that is something you would be interested in. Again, as I alluded to, it seems like that Mike Elias video press or whatever is going to happen today. If that's the case, we usually get some injury updates, bad or good, from the first time Elias talks in spring. So when we get those, that more likely is going to be what we're talking about on tomorrow's episode when I return. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.